In this video, we'll learn how to customize Maya's Hypershade so that it fits the needs of our projects. Okay, great. So I'm working again with this very simple scene with the two spheres inside of it. I'm going to go ahead and quickly jump into the Hypershade. We'll click on the little button up here. And now you'll notice here that my Hypershade looks even more different than we've seen it look in previous videos. Not to worry, this arrangement of my Hypershade probably matches pretty closely with what your Hypershade looks like if you're opening it up for the very first time. This should be pretty close to the default layout. Now it's important to remember that Maya's Hypershade is a customizable environment. This is an environment we can go into for all of our shading needs. Now, the two things that opened up here on the right-hand part of my Hypershade are the Material Viewer right here and the Property Editor right here. Let's talk about the Property Editor first. It's probably one of the more complex areas, depending on what we're working with. Now, this property editor is an area that will change depending on what you have selected. So you can see again, I have my shading network for our material example displayed down here inside my work area. And if I click on the material example right here, the surface material, you'll see here that what I'm looking at is a blend. You can see it listed right over here. And the name of that node is Material Example. Again, you can see blend right here. So what we're looking at here is Look Development View for the Property Editor. Let me go ahead and just sort of drag this up so we can look at this a little bit. And what you can see here is inside of Look Development View, we're getting all of the most important attributes for this blend material presented to us in this view. Now, if we were working, let's say, in an older version of Maya before the Hypershade had gone through this overhaul, the typical workflow would be to select your material and jump over here into the Attribute Editor and begin to work with the various attributes here in this part of the interface. Well, that's not necessary here inside of Maya 2017 because we can do that here inside of the Property Editor. And we can change this from Look Development View to Attribute Editor View by simply clicking on this little button right here. And you can see now my view matches up precisely with what I would see inside the Attribute Editor. Now watch what happens when I select a different node in my shading network. Maybe we select this grid node. I'll go ahead and click on that here. And you can see what is presented to me here inside the Property Editor changes to reflect my selection. And this will change, again, depending on which node you have selected here. Okay, great. So the Property Editor is going to be an important area for you to come in and begin to completely customize the materials or nodes that you're working with here inside of the Hypershade. Now, if we were to look above the Property Editor here, you'll notice here that we have this nice little handy Material Viewer that's available to us. Now, by default, this is probably going to be set to this shader ball geometry. But you can see here with my surface material selected, we can actually see how this material is behaving on some sample geometry here. We can, again, orbit around. We can zoom in and out using the typical navigation commands inside of the Maya interface. So just like a viewport. Now, we have some options up here at the top we can change. The first one is to change the way this is being rendered. Right now we're using the Maya hardware render, but I could drop this down and choose, in my case, the Arnold renderer. Now, if you have other engines that support Maya's Material Viewer installed, those may show up here as well. Now, we can also change the type of geometry we're looking at. Maybe we're working on a cloth material, and we want to see that material displayed on some kind of cloth geometry. Well, we can come in here to sort of some of these geometric presets and maybe change that up, so we can now look at how that material appears on this fabric that's draped over a sphere. Or maybe we want to work on something that looks more like a teapot. So you can see there are a number of different basic geometries that we can choose from here. Again, the shader ball is the basic default. Now this third column here, this third drop down, is for lighting. And right now you can see this is set to off. But if we drop this down, you'll see a number of different environment lighting options. Let's go ahead and choose exterior to color. And you'll see here initially nothing happens. But if I switch this over to Arnold, you'll notice here now we're getting an HDR image that's being used to create illumination for this particular piece of geometry. Let me turn that off. I'll go ahead and switch that back to hardware, turn that back to off. Now, at this point, let's talk about customizing this Hypershade some. How did I make these panels or make these areas disappear? Well, you'll notice here that there are some little X's here in the top right-hand corners of these windows, or at least most of them. If I were to close out the material viewer here, you'll see that it completely disappears from my interface. But we can open that back up again under the Windows menu by simply coming down here to Material Viewer. And when I open that up, it opens as a floating window. Now the beauty of this opening as a floating window is, one, we can resize this to whatever size we want it to be. We could float this over to a second monitor, or we can drag this around and dock it inside of our Hypershade wherever we want it to live. Maybe we want it to be right here. Now, anywhere you see this little perforated line on any of these little panels, you can click and drag and tear off a panel. So you can see I can float that back out, or I can come in and put it in its original position. You can also click this little button here to float the panel out so that you can move it around wherever you'd like it to live. Okay, great. So that is the material viewer and how we can begin to start customizing our Hypershade. Now, imagine that we want to start developing materials for our project, and we want to stay in the Hypershade as much as possible. There's a couple of other panels that I think you'll find very, very useful. Let me just move this one over here, and I'm going to sort of rearrange some things, because what I'd like to come in and drop in at this point is a viewport. We'll go ahead and open one of those up, and again, you can see it opens up pretty large, but we can come in and dock that in wherever we want it to live. So I can come in here now, and I can, let's just come under shading, and let's go ahead and smooth shade all. There we go. Now we're looking at something besides wireframe. We can come in here and we can use our navigation, we can orbit around, and we can do whatever we would like. I'm going to go ahead and tap the 6 key to turn on my hardware texturing so we can see our texture here. So we can come in and we can put a viewport right into the Hypershade. Pretty handy. Another really handy panel that you'll find, I think, useful in adding to the Hypershade is a render view. Because inevitably, as you are starting to develop materials, you may want to render those out in more of a fashion that relates to your project rather than using the material viewer. So you can come in here, and under the window menu, we can just simply add in a render view. We'll go ahead and drop that in just like so, and I'll just go ahead and set off a quick render using the Maya software render. Now again, this is a very basic scene. I don't have any custom lights created or anything like that, but you can see how easy it is to begin customizing this Hypershade so that it fits exactly the needs of you, the artist, as you're developing materials and doing the shading for your own personal projects. All right, great. With that said, let's go ahead and move on to our next video, and we'll learn how we can begin to view and arrange Hypershade nodes.